An 11-second drone video recorded at Giant's Causeway has sparked one of the strangest mysteries in recent years. The footage shows something that geologists say should be impossible. A massive section of basalt rock appears to slide open like a door, pauses for several seconds, and then closes again. No cracks. No dust. No visible seam left behind. When the stone seals itself again, the cliff face looks perfectly solid, exactly as it did before. But the drone camera recorded everything. So the question is simple and unsettling. How can solid volcanic rock behave like a mechanical door? And perhaps an even deeper question. If something opened that stone wall, what was behind it? A tourist's drone captures the impossible. The person who recorded the footage wasn't a scientist or a researcher. He was simply a tourist visiting the coast of Northern Ireland, hoping to capture the famous basalt columns from a bird's-eye view. He had flown a modest consumer drone, the kind hobbyists buy for sunsets and wedding shots, and for the first minute the camera gave him exactly what he wanted. Long, honeycombed columns catching low sunlight, gulls like punctuation marks above the sea. From above, the landscape looked timeless. But as the drone passed the eastern cliff face, something unexpected happened. A large basalt slab moved outward in a smooth motion. Not cracking. Not collapsing. It opened like a perfectly engineered door. And it stayed open for 11 seconds. Then it closed again. Completely silently. Park Ranger Thomas Brennan was on duty that morning. He had started his shift at first light, coffee still in his veins, keys heavy on his belt. He'd walked those paths since he was a teenager. The Causeway had a way of making even regular days feel small, sacred. When the rock moved, Brennan's hands started to shake. He tried calling it in on his radio, but his hands were shaking so badly he dropped it twice. His first words over the radio were simple. "The rock just opened." 3 other witnesses confirmed the same event: a family on a guided walk, an early morning photographer, and a fisherman whose boat had been hugging the coast. But something else made the story even stranger. Moments before the stone moved, several people reported hearing a deep rhythmic sound coming from inside the cliff. Slow. Steady. Almost like breathing. So ask yourself this. Was it just geological movement, or something else entirely? Investigators analyzed the footage. Within 24 hours, the tourist's footage, grainy, unglamorous, indisputable, was in the hands of experts. The video arrived at a local lab where technicians played it frame by frame, slowing the motion, running metadata checks, and preparing for the usual parade of debunking. They expected to find signs of digital manipulation or editing. There were none. The timestamps were intact. No visual artifacts. No evidence the footage had been altered. The rock truly appeared to open. But the biggest shock came afterward. When the slab closed again, investigators zoomed in on the area. There was no visible seam where the stone had separated. It looked as though the rock had never moved at all. For geologists, this raised an unsettling possibility. If the stone had opened like a door, then perhaps there was a space behind it. So investigators brought in scanning equipment to find out. The hidden chamber inside the cliff. Heavy boots, high-vis jackets, and a tangle of cables soon crowded the grassy path beneath the cliff. The atmosphere felt almost ceremonial. Scientists with handheld devices, rangers with clipboards, and reporters whispering like wind in the hexagonal stones. Researchers deployed ground-penetrating sonar across the exact section of cliff where the drone recorded the event. The machine hummed, blue images scrolled on a tablet, the sea hissed at the base of the rocks. At first, they expected something simple. Perhaps a small natural cavity formed by trapped volcanic gas millions of years ago. But the sonar revealed something entirely different. Behind the basalt wall was a sealed chamber. And the chamber wasn't empty. Inside were several tall vertical shapes. They were arranged in a straight line, perfectly spaced, standing upright. Their proportions appeared humanoid: shoulders, torsos, and head-like structures. But there was a problem. Each figure measured over 8 feet tall. Dr. Margaret Sullivan of Queen's University Belfast studied the scans carefully. She ran the scan again and again. Then she recalibrated the equipment. Every scan returned the same result. Tall figures, standing inside the rock. And that's when the geological problem became impossible to ignore. Basalt lava does not cool around objects that are standing upright, unless those objects were already standing there before the lava hardened. That means something was already inside that space 60 million years ago. Still standing. Still preserved. Now ask yourself something important. What kind of living being could remain upright while molten rock surrounded it? The team phrase at the edges. Not all experts handle the uncanny the same way. Some leaned on the bench, dry, methodical. Others walked the perimeter muttering worst-case scenarios. And then there was Declan. Declan Foley had spent 14 years in subsurface imaging. He had seen shipwrecks, buried foundations, even wartime bunkers preserved like slow fossils. He had a practical mind and a calm, weathered face. For him, the data were data. Until they weren't. After the scans were completed, Declan quietly approached his supervisor and asked for reassignment. "I can't go back in there," he said. The words were simple, but the tone carried something beyond fear, something like recognition. He would not explain further. He packed his gear the next morning and left without fanfare. What could unnerve a technician who had mapped centuries of human debris? What did he think he had seen, or sensed, in those ghostly scans? Questions multiplied. If the figures had been there before the lava, were they biological? Artificial? Something else? Who or what could stand unchanged for tens of millions of years? Preservation and protocol. The discovery forced a collision between caution and curiosity. Local authorities cordoned off the area. Conservationists argued against drilling or forcing the rock open. Damage could erase the very clues investigators hoped to read. Scientists pleaded for access. The public wanted spectacle, and the press wanted explanations. Which side should decide the first step? Could they open the slab without destroying it? If the slab operated like a door, what mechanism controlled it? Could the opening be triggered again, and should it be? Dr. Sullivan pushed for remote observation only. Cameras, microsamplers, and non-invasive spectroscopy. Instruments that might survey the chamber without human presence. She understood the stakes. A misstep could turn a singular find into a ruined curiosity. Yet at night, in the hotel bar where the team drank lukewarm tea and argued in softer voices, people traded theories that ranged from the scientific to the fantastical. What if these were not creatures at all, but statues made by a civilization lost to prehistory? What if the basalt had formed around some standing structure, pillars or totems, left by beings no longer known? Could it be an elaborate natural formation that happened to mimic humanoid shapes? Or might the chamber be a biological vault, some kind of prehistoric nursery frozen by an unstoppable deluge of lava? The riddle of time. The oldest puzzles are often those that ask us to think far beyond our own lifespans. How do you measure guilt or curiosity against an event that occurred before humans existed? For Dr. Sullivan, the find was both thrilling and unnerving because it forced her to hold two truths simultaneously: rigorous skepticism and open wonder. "You know what this does," she told the team one evening, rubbing tired eyes. "It makes us small in a very particular way. Not because it's huge, but because it ties us to a timescale we can hardly name. If something had lived, or been placed, there 60 million years ago, did that imply intelligence? Design? Or was this a quirk of geology that momentarily resembled purpose? What would you want to know first? The material composition of those figures? Their interior structure? Whether they were animate at any point? The questions were pricks on a map, radiating outward where every route seemed to lead to more questions. Public reaction and the weight of stories. Outside the cordon, local lore began to stitch itself to the event with astonishing speed. Tourists flocked in, cameras raised. Bloggers wrote breathless threads. Late-night radio hosts speculated about ancient astronauts, gods, and the end times. Shopkeepers sold postcards with a blank rectangle where the slab had opened. A small industry of souvenirs trademarked phrases, "I saw the rock breathe," and "Open the Causeway." The community felt both pride and unease. The Causeway was a place of quiet pilgrimage, not a global curiosity show. How to protect a World Heritage Site while answering the most basic of questions. What are those shapes, and are they dangerous? Nobody wanted to say the word monster. Not yet. But if these shapes had been standing in a chamber for 60 million years, what could they do, or be, now? A door that opens on questions. In the weeks that followed, the drone footage became both evidence and a dare. The slab remained intact. Cameras watched it constantly. Occasionally, playback would show nothing at all, just wind. The deep rhythmic sound a handful of witnesses swore they'd heard faded into disputed memory, like a remembered smell that only some claimed to sense. Still, the scans remained. The chamber persisted in their images, tall shapes, aligned, as if awaiting something. Why would anything wait for 60 million years? For what were they waiting? The story ends, for now, with decisions still pending, remote probes scheduled, ethics panels convened, and a slow, careful plan to learn more without destroying the extraordinarily fragile context of the find. Declan did not return. Thomas Brennan, who had been shaken to the core, started keeping a small notebook in his pocket filled with sketches and questions. Dr. Sullivan stood at the edge of the causeway at dusk, watching the stones change color, trying to imagine a world in which those silent figures had reasons to stand and reasons to be left alone. Which brings us back to the simplest, and perhaps cruelest, question of all. If you were the one to unlock that basalt door, would you open it? What would you hope, or fear, to find? He didn't argue. He didn't panic. He simply said he wasn't going back to that cliff face. When asked why, he explained something unusual. While monitoring the sonar signals, he detected a faint secondary vibration coming from behind the wall. It wasn't random. It was rhythmic, slow, regular, almost biological. In his own words, it sounded like something breathing. And the strangest part? He said the pattern changed when people moved closer to the rock, as if whatever was inside knew they were there. The event in Ireland might sound unique at first, an isolated anomaly buried within ancient volcanic stone, dismissed as either misinterpretation or exaggeration. But the deeper researchers look, the more unsettling a pattern begins to emerge. What if the Giant's Causeway is not an exception at all? What if it is simply one visible fragment of something far larger, something quietly repeating itself across the world? At the ancient necropolis of Myra rock tombs, archaeologists expected to find little more than the usual remnants of Lycian burial traditions, stone-cut facades, weathered inscriptions, and the silent testimony of a long-lost civilization. Instead, they uncovered something that didn't fit neatly into any historical framework. Several tomb entrances appeared sealed, not from erosion or collapse, but from the inside. Stone slabs that should have opened outward were instead pressed tightly into their frames, as if something within had forced them shut. The alignment of the stone showed pressure patterns inconsistent with natural forces. Even more disturbing were the markings discovered on the inner walls. Thin, uneven grooves. Irregular. Jagged. Too chaotic to be tools. Too deliberate to be random. When examined closely, the grooves resembled fingernail scratches, desperate, repeated attempts to carve into unyielding stone. But how could human nails leave marks on rock? And if they weren't human, then what made them? One particular site, the Lion Tomb, deepened the mystery further. Here, life-sized stone figures carved into the tomb walls displayed something that defied both archaeology and geology. Embedded within the rock were traces of organic material. Not fossils in the traditional sense, but remnants, microscopic strands that showed signs of biological composition. Material that should not exist within solid stone. Unless the stone had formed around something alive. Or something had become part of the stone itself. What does it mean when the boundary between living tissue and rock begins to blur? And how many such boundaries have we overlooked simply because they challenge what we believe is possible? Thousands of miles away, in the sprawling darkness of Mammoth Cave, the longest known cave system on Earth, explorers have reported phenomena that echo the same unease. Passages mapped in one expedition have been found sealed in the next, with no evidence of collapse or obstruction. Walls that once opened into deeper tunnels now end in smooth, uninterrupted stone. As if the cave itself had changed its mind. Or rearranged itself. Even more chilling are the human remains found in certain chambers, ancient skeletons positioned in kneeling poses, heads bowed, hands resting as though in quiet surrender. There are no signs of struggle. No indication of violence. Just stillness, choice, or acceptance. Why would individuals choose to remain in such depths, far from light, far from escape? Were they seeking something? Or were they responding to something already there? In several isolated chambers, researchers have recorded faint whispering sounds. The recordings are consistent, low-frequency murmurs that rise and fall like distant voices. Audio analysts have studied these sounds extensively, attempting to match them to known languages or natural phenomena. They have found no match. Not linguistic. Not environmental. Not mechanical. So what produces a sound that resembles speech, yet belongs to no known form of communication? And why does it only appear in places where human presence feels unwelcome? Individually, each of these events might be dismissed. A geological oddity here. An archaeological anomaly there. But together, they begin to form something far more unsettling, a pattern that stretches across continents and centuries. A pattern that suggests these are not isolated mysteries, but connected signals. Which brings us back to Ireland. After the initial sonar scans at the Giant's Causeway, authorities acted quickly, but quietly. Access to the eastern section of the cliffs was restricted with minimal explanation. No press conference. No detailed report. Just a rope barrier and a vague warning about geological instability. But if this was merely a safety precaution, why were the sensors left in place? The devices embedded in the rock face continued to collect data, minute by minute, hour by hour. They were designed to monitor natural geological activity, shifts in temperature, pressure changes from ocean currents, microfractures within the basalt columns. Routine measurements. Predictable patterns. At least, that's what Dr. Emer McGuire expected when she began reviewing the data months later. An environmental monitoring specialist known for her methodical precision, she approached the recordings with the assumption that any anomalies would have logical explanations. Thermal expansion. Tidal forces. Instrument error. But what she found did not align with any known natural process. The rhythmic vibration detected during the initial scans was still present. And it had changed. It was stronger now. Clearer. More defined. Even more unsettling, the intervals between pulses had shortened by nearly 12% over 6 months. A pattern that accelerates is not static. It evolves. It progresses. It approaches something. 3 times, the sensors recorded dramatic spikes, sharp increases in activity that broke the otherwise steady rhythm. When Dr. McGuire cross-referenced the timestamps, she noticed something that made her pause. Each spike coincided with human presence near the restricted area. Maintenance workers conducting routine checks. Tourists wandering too close to the barrier. Researchers attempting to observe from a distance. The pattern didn't just exist. It reacted. That realization changed everything. Because a reaction implies awareness. Colleagues later reported that Dr. McGuire used a word they had never heard her apply to data before. She called the vibration aware. What does it mean for a signal, embedded within 60-million-year-old rock, to respond to human proximity? Is it detecting movement, heat, sound, or something less tangible, something we don't yet understand how to measure? And perhaps more importantly, if it is aware of us, how long has it been watching? Long before modern science offered explanations for the formation of basalt columns, Irish folklore told a very different story. According to legend, the causeway was built by the giant Finn Mac Cumhaill, known in English as Finn McCool. A warrior of immense strength. A builder of impossible paths. The tale describes how he constructed the stone bridge across the sea to confront a rival in Scotland. For centuries, the story has been treated as myth, a symbolic narrative shaped by imagination and cultural memory. But what if myths are not inventions? What if they are interpretations? Simplified explanations for events that could not be understood at the time? Some local residents have never viewed the legend as mere fiction. For them, it carries a weight that goes beyond storytelling. They speak of it not as something that happened long ago, but as something that was never fully resolved. Something unfinished. Fishermen who work the waters near the cliffs have reported strange occurrences for years, subtle at first, easy to dismiss. Low, resonant sounds that seem to emerge from the rock itself. Not echoes. Not wind. Breathing. Always from the same section of the cliff. Always during moments of unnatural stillness, when the usual sounds of waves and wind fall silent. 3 weeks ago, One fisherman anchored near the eastern cliffs experienced something that unsettled him enough to abandon his position entirely. He described hearing slow, heavy breathing coming from just above the waterline. Not distant. Not faint. Close. Deliberate. He left immediately. And he has not returned since. What produces a sound like breathing from within solid stone? And why does it occur only in the area now restricted by authorities? The sensors remain active. The vibration pattern continues. The intervals between pulses grow shorter, each cycle bringing it closer to what? Authorities have never released the sonar images of the chamber discovered within the rock. They have not explained the tall figures detected inside. They have offered no clarification for the continued restriction of access. Silence, in this case, is not absence of information. It is containment. Because once a question is asked publicly, it demands an answer. And some answers are not easily controlled. Which leaves us with a series of questions that feel increasingly difficult to ignore. If something has been sealed inside that volcanic rock for 60 million years, why did the stone door open now? What triggered it? Was it human activity, environmental change, or something internal, something that reached a point where remaining sealed was no longer possible? And if the rhythm detected by the sensors is accelerating, what happens when it reaches its end? Will the door open again? Or has it already opened, more times than anyone realizes? Perhaps the most troubling question of all is not about what lies beneath the Giant's Causeway, but about what connects it to the other sites around the world. Resealed tombs, shifting caves, whispers in empty chambers, biological traces in stone. Are these separate mysteries, or fragments of a single global phenomenon that has been quietly unfolding for thousands, perhaps millions, of years? If there is a pattern, who or what designed it? And if something is waking up beneath the Giant's Causeway, is it the only one, or is it simply the first to be noticed?